Alright, welcome back to Illustrator Adobe Classroom in a Book, lesson number 2. First, of course, I'm going to go ahead and make sure Illustrator is open. The next thing I'm going to do is open the lesson file for lesson 2. And the file I'm looking for is one called L2 start _1. So I'm going to go to File, Open, and navigate to where I've stored my media files. Go to my lesson 2 folder and choose the L2 start _1.ai file. When I have that selected, I'm going to go ahead and hit open. And then I will go ahead and maximize the window for my screen. And then the very first thing I want to do, just like when anytime I open a lesson file or I start working on a new file of my own, is I want to go ahead and do a file save as. So I'm going to go to File, Save As. And this one I'm just going to call mine a demo file. Again, when you go back to the lesson files in the book, you have specific file names to give them. For the purposes of the demo, I'm just going to call it that. And I'm just going to save mine to the desktop again. You should be saving yours to either your flash drive or to your hard drive, and just make sure you have some sort of backup solution for it. So I'm going to go ahead and say save. And again, we'll talk about these saving options later, and I'll say OK. Alright, so I have my file saved, and I can go ahead and move on. Okay, and so the first thing whenever you're working with anything in Illustrator is you have to be able to select an object. You can't change or apply any attribute to an object that exists without selecting it. And there are several different ways to select objects in Illustrator, and we're going to go over some of them. And then again, just as a reminder for these lectures, I'm going to just go over part of the lesson in the book. For your lab assignment, you need to actually go back and finish the entire lesson and submit those files to Blackboard. So again, we have two types of selection tools which we're going to talk about. First, I'm going to choose the regular selection tool, which is you'll see that you have a selection tool that's a black arrow and a selection tool that's a white arrow. You want, for this part of the lesson, for it to be the selection tool that is a black arrow, and the keyboard shortcut for that is V. So I'm going to go ahead and select my selection tool. And you'll see that as I mouse over various objects in my... Actually, let me go ahead and zoom in a little. Again, you remember from the last lesson, you can choose your magnifying glass from your tools, or you can use your keyboard shortcut, which is a Z, to zoom in on part of your document. And then I'm going to go ahead and switch back to the selection tool by either just pressing the V key or going back up to your tool panel and choosing the black arrow. So you'll see as I mouse over various objects on my artboard, I'll get an arrow, and depending on what part of the object I'm mousing over on, I have a little black square next to my arrow, or I have a white square next to the arrow. Illustrator is giving you a visual indicator to let you know what you're actually mousing over. If you are mousing over something and it gives you a white square, it means that you're actually over an anchor point in your object or in your drawing. If you are moused over something and you have a black square next to your arrow, it means you're over a path part or the area in between two anchor points. So again, it's just kind of giving you an indicator of what you're actually hovering over. And I'm going to zoom out here. Again, now that I've shown you that part, I'm going to zoom back in on these 4 colored shapes at the bottom of my artboard, and then go ahead and switch back to my selection tool. And so now just, on the most basic level of selecting something, if I select one of these objects, like I select this first sort of apple shape, you'll see that that's selected. If I go ahead and click on the second apple shape, it selects that second apple shape, but it deselects that first apple shape. So just bear in mind that if you're trying to just switch selections between objects, you can just click around. If you want to actually select more than one object, there are a couple of other options to do that. If you want to individually select objects, you need to go ahead and select, the one object that you want, and then just hold down the Shift key on your keyboard and select the additional object that you want. And now you'll see after you did that, after you held the Shift key when you clicked on that second object, now you have two objects selected instead of one. Another way, and I'm just going to go ahead and click somewhere else in my document to deselect. Another way that you can select multiple objects, and this is really useful when you're selecting several different objects in sort of the same area, is you can go ahead and click and drag a marquee over the objects that you want to select. And when I click and drag that, you'll see when I let go, it actually selects both objects together. So that's another way where you can very quickly and simply select multiple objects. And you'll see if I want to move those objects now that I have them selected, you'll see as I drag them around in my document, it gives me an outline of what I'm actually drawing, and then as I start to align things with other objects in my document, you'll see it gives me smart guides, that sort of green line in the middle of my screen. It's indicating that, I'm getting to, aligning with something else. So again, it's just giving me an indicator of that. And as I drag something to the right, again, it'll give me an indicator that I have an intersection there as well. So again, Illustrator's trying to give you as many indications of what you're actually seeing as it possibly can. Alright, so let's go ahead and I'm going to zoom out again. And another way that Illustrator gives you an option to select multiple items and then apply various attributes to it is it very quickly allows you to align, say in this instance, fence posts, so that they'll all be aligned along the bottom edge as you'd expect a fence post to be, instead of having to go in and individually align them. You can select all of them. And to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and drag a selection rectangle around my fence post. And then I'm going to go up to my control panel, and you'll see in the middle part of my control panel, there are a bunch of align options. And the one that I want is actually sort of in the middle. I want the one that's going to say vertical align bottom. So that's what I'm going to click, and I just want to zoom out a little bit for you so that you can see what actually happens when you do this. I'm going to go ahead and click that. Actually, one thing that I actually had to fix, I went ahead and did edit undo, since that wasn't the result that I wanted. One thing for this to work that you want to make sure that you have, if you're trying to align multiple objects to themselves, is that you actually have in your alignment, you have align to selection selected. I had align to artboard selected, which meant that all of my fence posts aligned along the bottom, but they aligned along the bottom of the artboard. So I just want these aligned to each other, so I'm going to go ahead and say align to selection, and then go ahead and try it one more time, and you'll see that now I got the results that I expected. So I got my fence posts, and they're actually all aligned along their bottom portion. And so now we're going to go ahead and move on. Before, when we aligned these fence posts, you'll see that they all align to just the bottommost part of the fence post. So if I show you, I'm just going to go ahead and do an edit undo or Command or Control Z. You'll see when I did an edit, or when I did to an align to bottom, it shows the bottommost of these fence posts, and then if I redo what I had done, it just made them all align to that bottommost point. Well, let's say I wanted all of the items to align to a specific point where one of the fence posts was. And so if I go ahead and go back to Edit Undo, I can actually choose a key object. So I can designate for Illustrator. So in order to create that sort of key object, I'm going to again select all of my fence posts. And then I'm going to select the sort of key object, and by doing that I can just select any one of these fence posts to create to make a key object. I'm going to choose this leftmost one. I'm just going to single click on that leftmost fence post, and now you'll see it has sort of a double or triple weight selection around it. And so now when I go and do the same thing that I'd done before, where I just go align to bottom, or vertical align bottom, you're going to see that all of these other fence posts actually come up to the level of this fence post instead of before when all of them came down to the bottommost. So let's go ahead and try that. And I'm going to choose vertical align bottom, and you'll see again all of the other fence posts align to the one that I had selected as my key object. Alright, so let's go ahead and move on. So we've gone ahead and we've aligned all of these fence posts, but you'll see now that all of these fence posts are pretty uniform except for this one that is much taller than any of the other fence posts. And we've basically just been working so far with the selection tool, the sort of black arrow with the keyboard shortcut V that's in the upper left-hand corner of your toolbar. Now we're going to actually start working a little bit with the direct selection tool. The main difference between the selection tool, the black arrow, and the direct selection tool, the white arrow, is that the black selection tool, the regular selection tool, selects the entire object. So when you click on something, it's going to select all the points, all of the paths, everything, all the anchors. When you use the direct selection tool, you're only using that to choose a part of the object. So either an anchor point or a path or just a portion of the object. So most of the time we're working with the selection tool. Depending on your use case, sometimes we're going to use a direct selection tool when we only want to select part of an object. So we're going to go ahead and use the direct selection tool right now because we just want to choose part of the object. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and select this anchor point, the sort of anchor point that doesn't belong or it doesn't match all the other ones, and we know again that we're on an anchor point because we have that white square next to our arrow instead of a black square. So I'm going to go ahead and select that, and then I'm going to select the topmost point of any of these other fence posts. When you're aligning points, the last object selected functions as the key anchor. So I'm going to go ahead and shift-click this other anchor point, and then I'm going to choose vertical align top, which is good. Let me go ahead and zoom in on the align button. It's approximately in the middle, vertical align top. It's, I guess, to the left of vertical align bottom. So again, I'm going to choose vertical align top, and let me just go ahead and show you what that's going to do. So when I do that, you'll see that it brought this one fence post that was sort of different back into alignment with all the other ones. And you know it's precise, it's exactly the same, and it's done very, very easily. Alright, so now we're going to continue with our alignment, and I'm going to switch back to just my regular selection tool. So I can either go and choose my black arrow from my toolbar, or I can just press the V key. And now I actually want to distribute these fence posts across the, across, instead of having sort of these weird spaces. I want it to be much more uniform. So first I'm going to use my selection tool and just drag a marquee across my fence posts to select them all. And then I'm going to go back to my control panel, and I'm going to look for the option called Horizontal Distribute Center. And it's almost all the way over towards the right-hand side of these tools. It's a second from the right of the distribution, or the alignment tools. So I'm going to choose this one. Go ahead and zoom out again for you. And when I do that, you'll see that across the space, all the fence posts are now very evenly distributed. And I didn't have to sit and sort of figure that out on my own. I selected them, I distributed them, and it was very, very easy. And again, something that I just want to mention too, as we're working through this, you want to save periodically. You want to do a file save, or what I do most of the time is sort of anytime I push back or I think about something, I just reach down, and if you're working on a Mac, it's Command S, or if you're working on a PC, it's Control S, and it just saves my document. So it sort of saves my progress. Alright, so now we're going to actually move over to the second page of our artboard. You just want to zoom out and move to that second page. And we're going to work with aligning things within groups, or actually selecting things when things are grouped or ungrouped. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select the leaves and the trunk of this tree. So I'm just going to drag a selection tool over the two of those. And I'm going to go up to Object and Group, or Command G works too. And so now the advantage of that is if I want to move this, I can select either the trunk or the leaves and they'll move as a group. So I don't always have to make sure that I have those two things selected. But the advantage is that Illustrator also has an option called isolation mode. So if I want to do some sort of change within this group, like say I want to change the trunk to be a different color, something, or I want to make the top of my tree a little more green, I can do that without having to ungroup my selections. If I just double click on one of the objects, you'll see that now I'm actually inside of this group making changes. And it's going to function just like it did before I actually had grouped the object together. And so I'm just going to very quickly, I'm just going to make this a darker green, just so you can see that it's actually changing it without having to ungroup my selection. Or heck, maybe I'll just make it a red, so it'll be the fall, or an orange color, so it'll be the fall. And you'll see now that I've actually, my tree is still functioning, it's still moving as a group, but I didn't actually have to ungroup it to make any changes to it. And I'm actually going to undo my color change because it's going to provide a little bit more contrast when we go to the next stage of this. Alright, so now we're back out of isolation mode. And now we're going to work with selecting objects within stacked groups, or objects that are stacked on top of each other. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab one of these apples from Artboard 1. And let me zoom in just a little bit for you so that we have a little bit more screen real estate. So I'm going to switch back to my selection tool and I'm going to grab one of these apples from the first artboard and I'm going to drag it into the treetop. And you'll see I'm going to pick a random part of the treetop to drop it in so I can see this nice red apple against a green background. But now you see what the problem is that the apple was created before the tree, and because of the stacking order of Illustrator, it's now behind that tree, so we're not actually seeing it. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring that apple to the front so that we can actually see it. So we're going to go to Object, Arrange, Bring to Front. And now you'll see it's as we expected. We're seeing that nice bright green or bright red apple on top of that green tree. But what happens, and let me go ahead and drag this second red apple into the tree. What happens if, I bring the apple in the tree and I accidentally deselect it before I have a chance to change the stacking order? What do I do now? Do I have to, do I have to move the tree? Do I have to, what do I have to do? There's actually an option in Illustrator that will allow you to select something that's behind another object without having to move the object in front of it. Which again seems like something that would be, it's not that big of a deal, but it actually saves a lot of time and it makes your work a lot more efficient. So to find that apple, I'm going to go ahead and hold down the Control key if you're on a PC or the Command key if you're on a Mac. And you'll see if I select on that tree once, I get kind of a little caret next to my selection tool, and then if I actually select or click on where the apple is, it will actually select the apple that's behind the tree. And now I can go ahead and go back to Object, Arrange, Bring to Front. And so I was able to change that stacking order. I was able to select one of my objects without having to actually move the object that was in front of it, which is really nice because when you're working, you're creating things, you don't necessarily know what order things are going to be created in. Alright, and that concludes Lesson 2 from Classroom in the Book CS6 for Adobe Illustrator. Or the high points. Make sure that you go back in the book and you follow along and actually complete the entire lesson. When you're finished with the lesson files, you actually turn them in on Blackboard. Alright, thank you, and I will see you in Lesson 3.